My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guests for this special one-hour presentation are Brenda Jacobs, the Secretary of the Rhode Island Rifle and Revolver Association and their Chief Lobbyist, and Glenn Valentine, Chairman of the Rhode Island Second Amendment Political Action Committee. Welcome back, both of you, to State of the State.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Article 1, Section 22 of the Rhode Island Constitution says simply, "The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." To infringe means to encroach upon or nibble away at. Each year for the last several years, the General Assembly and Governor have signed into law a series of common sense solutions to gun violence. These include the Domestic Violence Act, the Red Flag Act, the Safe Schools Act, and last year, the Safe Storage Act. Yet a ban on assault weapons has been held for further study year after year after year. This year, Governor McKee said in his State of the State address that he would include an amendment to his budget proposal that would ban assault weapons, assault rifles, or whatever you want to call them. He said the time has come, and now he was joined in his call by all of the other four, all five state general officers and the leaders of both the House and the Senate in calling for the ban. Now, a bill banning these assault weapons has been stripped from the budget, or said it would be stripped by Speaker Sakarchin. Surely it has. There are bills in both the House and the Senate, companion bills, that will ban assault weapons. And so I guess my first question is, why shouldn't we have an assault weapons ban in Rhode Island, Mrs. Jacobs?
Well, I feel like we have already given up enough. And an assault weapons ban will not make Rhode Island any safer. In fact, we're the fourth safest state in the United States, and I believe that it would only work against us, actually, because if you're only going to let the criminals have firearms, then it's going to make the state actually less safe for the rest of us.
Would you like to add anything to that, Mr. Phil?
Well, I think the debate about guns, it's a political debate. So, like, it's not about public safety. The folks that are advocating for these things for the last, let's say, 40 years or so, they've coined this term assault weapon, which is trying to conflate a semi-automatic rifle and a semi-automatic shotgun, whatever it is, semi-automatic firearms with fully automatic firearms, which in this state are not lawful to possess. And so by conflating those two things, it's very easy to get the public to maybe think that it's a fair compromise to limit the capacity of these firearms, like we did with the magazine ban, or limit the types of firearms that you could own based on the fact that they're semi-automatic in nature. They share similar features, but they're not similar in how they function. And so they're able to sort of get folks to believe that it's got certain features in that firearm. In the sponsor's own words, Jason Knight, most of his arguments predicated on the fact that these firearms are more controllable. Well, these are the firearms that people purchase to hunt, to go shoot sporting clays, sport in general, competition, but more importantly, self-defense. And so this bill is advocating, we don't disagree, that this bill actually targets a lot of the features on semi-automatic firearms that make them more controllable. That's part of the being safe with a firearm. They're eliminating the possibility, I guess, they think, that someone might commit some horrific act with one of these firearms, but the inevitability is that they're taking firearms, stripping them of these features that make them more controllable. You'll have 200,000 plus gun owners across the state using these firearms on a daily basis, scattered across the state in a way they weren't meant to be used.
Don't other states have an assault weapon ban?
So California was the first one, and I think it was after the shooting in San Ysidro, California, and then Stockton, California in the 80s. I was in high school and probably middle school. But they coined the term semi-automatic rifle and a semi-automatic assault weapon, and they've had it since then, and yet they lead the country in mass shootings, and they largely involve these firearms that they've banned decades ago. I think they passed their ban in 1989. We had a federal ban, but since then we've had other states that have passed these bans that still continue to have these same mass shootings with these same types of firearms.
The thing that seems to me is that we're making a distinction between semi-automatic and automatic, and I guess that goes back to the actual definition of an assault weapon, correct?
Yeah.
So in the military sense, or under the terms, for example, of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, Do they have a definition of an assault weapon, and how does that compare to what we're talking about?
It would have a select fire, which would make it fully automatic. That would be what a military assault weapon is.
Okay, so you have to be able to fire. Explain for the audience that may not know the difference between semi-automatic and automatic fire.
Okay, so there's a switch on it that allows the firearm to fire continuously, or they can switch it and have it fire every time the trigger is pulled.
Okay, so.
And those are federally banned. Anything fully automatic is already federally banned.
Okay. But the fact is that military-style weapons are, you said you're talking about hunting and target shooting and so forth, but they're really designed to kill people. They're not really for hunting or target shooting. Military-style weapons are to kill people, aren't they?
Well, it's not a military-style firearm, though. I mean, that's their term. They've decided that they're going to extend that definition of assault weapon, which is a machine gun, which is meant for the battlefield. They're extending that definition to include firearms that are in common use across this state and across the country. It's obviously largely about the AR-15, which is the most common firearm in this country. There's 40, 50, 60 million of these things nationwide. So this isn't like bump stocks, these obscure things that the General Assembly regulated where only a few hundred people had maybe own these statewide. In the last, let's say, 15 years, this state has seen well over 1 million firearms transferred. The majority of firearms that are in people's possession right now that, again, for lots of reasons, but more importantly, self-defense, they are made to be more effective at defending yourself. And they'd like to label that as making it more, I guess, applicable in mass shootings, but that's misuse of a firearm. People own these things statewide. By the definition of this bill, probably north of 500,000 firearms that will fit into the category of assault weapon. These are firearms that people own for self-protection.
I want to expand on that too, because there's another component of this that people often overlook, and that's national defense. A lot of these firearms are in homes and are in, people's possessions because they are part of our national defense system. It started out as the DCM project, now it's a CMP project, and I can tell you at our club, we have actually been called upon, especially now with Fort Devens range closing down, we've been called upon to let them use our range, and because we have people that shoot in a high power league that are very familiar with these firearms, they've actually asked us to help train soldiers and kids before they go into the service because they don't have enough instructors to train them fast enough. And that happened right before Desert Storm. All of a sudden, they had all these recruits come in. They didn't have enough people to train them, so they actually called our club, asked our guys to help train the kids. They trained them on assembling, reassembling, cleaning, and they did 2 weekends full of active fire. So that's a component that's often overlooked because that's the self-defense of our nation too. Yeah. So that can't be overlooked because it's important to our freedom as a whole country.
How often are these assault weapons, military-style weapons, how often are they used in committing crimes in Rhode Island, let's say?
Well, virtually never. I mean, we have a very low homicide rate with firearms in the state, homicide in general, but in this state, it barely breaks double digits, thank God. I mean, it would be nice, it was great if it was zero, but it's low. It's one of the lowest in the country. We typically go back and forth with New Hampshire as being the lowest. I think we're the 4th lowest now. But over the last, let's say, 15 years, since Newtown, we used to amass all the police reports out of the city of Providence that involved firearms when they kept making a mention that we need to have a ban on assault weapons, we need to have a reduction in magazine capacity. So we presented to the General Assembly exactly what the firearms were in the state that were being used, that were being seized. And it was north of 90% of these firearms were handguns, largely lower capacity revolvers and let's say 5 or 6 shot small pocket pistols. So we made the case then that the legislation they were trying to pass was a complete misalignment to what the bill actually did. Just recently, the Attorney General's report, which is a mandatory report that the General Assembly requested twice on 2 occasions. They passed a bill where the Attorney General has to report out what gun-related crimes took place that year, prosecutions and the types of firearms, and parallel provisions have gone through that report. And same thing, they've come to the same conclusion that north of 90% of these firearms that are used in a crime or seized by law enforcement, so they're not all used in crimes, they can be unrelated to violence, it's been still taken in whatever situation. But it's largely handguns. Even mass shootings across the country, it's largely handguns are responsible for that. But post the Heller decision in 2009 or 2013. The Supreme Court affirmed the fact that the Second Amendment protects handguns under the Second Amendment, and so they've moved on to the next thing on the list. And so this bill, as it has in the last 20 so years when they're trying to push this in Rhode Island, is misaligned to the actual crime that's taking place with firearms, which is low, by the way, in Rhode Island.
But you referred to the Attorney General's report. That was fairly recently enacted. That it's really designed to see how effective the Attorney General is in prosecuting gun-related crimes. Is that
so there's a few components there. It's arrests, prosecutions, convictions, and so you can look up the cases based on the Right Court Connect. You can look up what the disposition of those cases are, and so that's where we get the data, or folks have gotten data related to the actual firearms that are used.
How often? Does it show how often these cases are plea bargained away? Is that part of the report? Well,
we've looked into that, and most times the gun charges are plea bargained away. And the other thing that we've noticed is that most of the times the firearm charges are with a drug charge. So they're already in the wrong before they even bring in the firearm. But the firearm, these charges are being plea bargained out almost every time.
Right. I've often wondered about that, because usually when they show a drug bust, they show what they've confiscated, and there's the drugs, there's some money, and there's one or more firearms. And
The other thing that we also notice is that there's a lot of repeat offenders. So when we went back and we looked at the cases, then we went back and looked at the people, the actual, the person who committed the crime, and we've found that sometimes it's 11, 12 times they've already been arrested, and they're still out on the street. So, or the cases are taking 3, 4, 5 years to get through the court system. So we think that's a huge problem, because these people shouldn't be allowed back on the street. If you follow the laws that are already on the books, they should be charged and they should be in prison. And they're not enforcing the laws that we already have on the books. They're just trying to add more. And unfortunately, what happens is the minorities are the ones that get caught up in that loophole, because we found even in that report that more of the minorities are the ones that their cases are taking much longer, because they have to rely on public defenders, where you have white people that they can afford an attorney. And I hate to bring it to that level, but their cases are going through the courts faster. And that's not fair either, because
but while these cases are pending, are these people in jail, or are they on the street?
No, they're on the street.
Okay.
They're on the street.
When someone goes to purchase a firearm, is there some sort of a background check that is automatic? It has to be done?
Well, yeah. So
explain that. Yeah,
Rhode Island has front-loaded the law with lots of ways to prevent people that shouldn't have firearms to get access to those firearms. So when you purchase a firearm, you have to have a background check, both state and local. It's a comprehensive. I'm sorry, I meant federal here. Sorry. Yeah. So it's comprehensive. We had that for decades, and again, it's worked in terms of making sure you can sort of separate the folks that shouldn't have firearms and shouldn't have access to them. Rather, you look to the north, you've got Massachusetts, which has an assault weapons ban. Connecticut's had one for again, 2 states that have had them for decades, and they've had more situations that have involved those types of guns than Rhode Island has, thank God. So it's working effectively, but again, back to the point that this is a political push. And getting back to the Attorney General's report, when the General Assembly put that bill in, and I think there was one version passed about 6 years ago, and then maybe a housekeeping bill that was maybe 2 or 3 years later. There were folks that voted against that bill, both actually, and the reason why, it was the folks that advocate for these types of bills, these bans on magazine capacity, certain types of semi-automatic firearms. And the case they made was that this would only get in the way of having their bills passed. And this was said on the House floor. So they don't want the data to drive the dialogue and drive the legislation in the General Assembly. They want to keep this as a perennial issue, right, so that they can again, make this it's all about moving sort of that Democratic Party a little bit further to the left. The progressive movement in the state is huge on pushing this agenda, and they see this as something that's going to push them over the top. And so it will never go away. But these folks were opposed to having any sort of data-driven conversation about what's actually happening in this state.
Why is the left side of the Democrat Party, why are they so interested in banning these assault weapons? Do you have any?
Yeah, it's
well,
more,
you're a lobbyist. You're up there all the time.
I can tell you it's the money. You know, politicians need issues in order to get money to run their campaigns. And a lot of this money that they're getting is coming from out of state. And we've tracked millions of dollars that come in from out of state and go right directly to the progressive candidates. And they do it through independent expenditures.
What do you mean? I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the term independent expenditures.
Okay, so you have campaign finance reports that you're required to file as a candidate.
Right.
Okay, independent expenditures can be any amount of money that comes in from other groups and can fund your campaign.
Oh.
So they pay for your printing, they pay for your website, they pay for your mailers.
Okay, I wasn't familiar with. I want to make sure the audience understood that.
No, I can explain the whole, the whole thing. So they have outside parties that donate. So Women Vote is a big PAC that contributes. Planned Parenthood actually is one of the largest contributors to the anti-gun movement.
Planned Parenthood?
Yeah, so what they've done is Planned Parenthood has merged with Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence, and they've formed Rhode Island Values Project. So now they are funding this Rhode Island Values group that is paying for campaign expenses for most of the progressives.
I see. Oh, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, I have proof. You know me.
Well, I'm sure.
I can always back up what I'm going to say.
I'm not questioning the
yeah,
veracity.
But it is literally, we've tracked millions of dollars throughout the year since they've started using independent expenditures as a tool to get money into different states. We're not the only state that's being done to. Any state that they're trying to really push the progressive left, you'll find that in the independent expenditures.
Okay. Now, Representative Knight, who we've referred to a couple of times, was on this program before he introduced the bill. He said that one of his objections to these military-style weapons, and I'm kind of going to paraphrase, he said they can spray a large number of bullets over a large area. That's why no one should have them. Did you either want to respond to that argument?
I mean, any firearm's capable of that. I mean, I think largely in these situations where people have a firearm and they're going to commit some sort of horrific act, they're methodical, it's well thought out. They have the advantage of knowing what they're going to do. So I think for folks that are potential victims, they should have the ability to have the same capacity as the person that's going to ignore the law that says they can't have that capacity. This idea of spraying into crowds, I mean, I think that's sort of a fiction movie narrative.
Yeah. And honestly, you just can't legislate someone that's evil. If they're hell-bent on doing a crime, that they're gonna do the crime. I don't think legislatively you can stop someone from being evil. You can't legislate morals. You can't legislate that moral compass that some people just don't have. And I think that, to take so many law-abiding citizens and make us the criminal, we're out there, we're not doing anything wrong. We're just living our lives and working, and we use firearms as to bring our families together. We use them for competition. It's just family traditions, and now you're making us the criminal when we have no intention of ever behaving that way.
Right, and I think the nature. I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
The nature of the bill is it extends so far into virtually all firearms that people own in the state for self-protection, and again, any number of things. But somehow we've managed to not engage in that activity. We have again, nationally, a handful of people that have done some awful things. But if law-abiding gun owners in this state couldn't behave appropriately with these types of firearms, you would certainly know it. It would be in the news every day. So most of us, almost all of us, aren't involved in anything that's illegal, aren't involved in anything that's unsafe. Doesn't seem to be a need for it.
The fact remains, though, that we're all familiar with mass shootings that have occurred And in most cases, it appears that these so-called military-style or assault weapons are used. It just seems to me that if we ban them or get them out of people's hands, we'd be safer. Would you?
Well, California's an example of that. Maryland's an example of that. Chicago's an example of that. They've had these bans for decades, and it hasn't stemmed the violence associated with these types of firearms, whereas New Hampshire has virtually no regulations. I don't think there are many laws at all that restrict any type of firearm. And you can lawfully own machine guns in New Hampshire, and they don't have. When was the last time we saw a mass shooting in New Hampshire, right? So California leads the pack, and they've had these things, the San Bernardino shooters. They had all of the firearms and the accoutrements that they've outlawed for decades. So it won't make a difference. And the nature of the bill is actually that, it takes a semi-automatic firearm, defines it as an assault weapon based on all of the features that you would attach to this thing. So it's foolish for someone like Jason Knight to think that you would allow someone to own a certain type of firearm that could, in a matter of seconds, be converted into the very firearm that they're talking about is going to make it more controllable in a mass shooting situation. But when they go into your house and you've got that neutered firearm that doesn't accept a detachable magazine anymore because the legislation says so, you're following the law and the person that breaks in your home isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're just saying, do you have anything?
I agree with everything that Glenn said. And again, the bill is so far overreaching, and it's not ever gonna make things safer. It's just not.
I was surprised when you said that the range at, it used to be Fort Devens, and now it's obviously a deactivated post. They're closing the range, so they had to come to your civilian range to practice or to fire?
Yeah, that actually people don't realize that we open our clubs for most police and for the National Guard, for the Army. They use the ranges at our gun clubs. Really? Yeah.
I don't think most people are aware of that.
No, most people aren't aware of a lot of the things that we do. Yeah. And that's, I think, what makes me most frustrated, because we are very important to the state of Rhode Island, whether you're a gun owner or you're not. We pay the excise tax that pays for all our parks, our boat ramps, all of our trails. So if you're a hiker or a biker, thank a hunter, because you have that open space because of us. We bring so much to the table economically, too. We have manufacturers in the state along with gun stores. We're bringing like $460 million a year into the state. We employ over 1,059 people. And not only that, but we have programs going all the time. If we want to talk safety, let's talk what we're doing. We're not putting T-shirts on kids and sending them to the State House, to chant, to take away our guns. We are holding safety classes. We're holding youth camps. We're holding youth hunter safety, regular hunter safety, range safety officers. We have, thousands of range safety officers in this state, and we are teaching every single week. So if we want to talk safety, we're already doing it. We already have suicide prevention programs. Hold My Gun is one of them. We have Project Child Safe. So we are already engaged in all these programs, and they are so far left that they won't even let us come to the table and show them the success that we've had, because they only have one thing in mind, and that's to disarm us.
Mm-hmm. I'm just surprised that the military and police are using a private club range for practice.
There's not a lot of ranges available, and then when some of the ranges in the state, the police ranges, were actually under construction and needed repair, they would call our gun clubs, and that's where they train, is at our gun clubs.
Yeah. The question I have is, your argument is often framed around the Second Amendment, or in the case of the Rhode Island Constitution, the clause that contains no militia clause, so that's not even an issue under the state. But the fact is that no amendment is absolute, and it seems that the measures that have been passed they're common sense solutions, aren't they, to this problem? And maybe we could say that the assault weapon ban, if it was enacted, would also be a common sense solution, because thank God we haven't had that situation of mass shooting in Rhode Island yet. Wouldn't that prevent that from happening?
Well, I think, when you look at, nothing is absolute. I mean, the analogy that folks give us is usually predicated on the whole free speech and you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. We have laws that dictate what you can and can't do with a firearm. But banning the firearm is sort of analogous to outlawing theaters for fear that you yell fire in your theater. And so it doesn't make sense that, again, the majority of people in Rhode Island that behave appropriately with firearms have to forfeit their property, register their property, destroy their property, sell their property to someone else in another state, I guess. It's I guess, safe for them, but not safe for us. It's not fair that we have to be subjected to that. And again, it's about self-defense. I mean, for me, I'm not a hunter. I don't shoot for sport. It's largely about self-defense. And so you're disarming folks or reducing the ability for them to defend themselves, predicated on the actions of someone else. Forget the fact that the Supreme Court, in 5 cases now, have ruled, 2 significantly ruled, what the Second Amendment is, or what is included in the Second Amendment. And if you read most of what's in the Bruin decision, they've set the stage for the fact that you can't outlaw these common use firearms, right? There's in the Heller decision as well. So just based on what the court has ruled alone, that we have the high ground on the issue. We have the Snopes case out of Maryland, which is any day now. We're probably going to be taken up by the Supreme Court. They're conferencing on it. The magazine ban in Rhode Island. So we know how this ends, as do the legislators. They're well aware. Jason Knight is well aware of how this is going to end for both of those 2 bills. But they don't care because it's about politics and it's not about public safety. So if the Supreme Court announced tomorrow that today we waited and we didn't hear, but if they announce next Monday that they're taking the Snopes case, the assault weapons ban out of Maryland, that should be it. This bill should be dead and go nowhere. But you'll watch them accelerate this thing through because they want that political victory. They could care less what happens.
So what you're saying is, even though it's a possibility that the United States Supreme Court would overturn the assault weapons ban in Maryland, and then presumably that would set the precedent nationally, right, that the pushes to pass this bill simply so that it gets a scalp on the belt.
And they want to tie us up in court for years. That's actually what he said. He said that he wants us to be tied up in court for years.
No, when you say who said that?
Jason.
Representative
Knight.
Jason Knight,
Yep.
was on this program.
Yep.
He said they want to be tied up in court for years.
They want to tie us up in court for years. A lot of the sentiment up there is that they know it's unconstitutional, and yet they still want to push it through because they know how long it will take us to do legal action.
That's very strange, considering that these people have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution. You're saying that they'll pass a bill they know is unconstitutional? Mm-hmm. Well, I hope people in Rhode Island understand what you just said.
Right.
That if they've acknowledged that the bill that they're considering is unconstitutional and they still want to
tie us up in court for years.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the bill a little bit. First of all, I understand that Speaker of the House Shekarchi had a meeting and greeting at a local coffee shop recently. I did not attend. And he's told the people there, who are mostly from your side of the argument, that the assault weapons ban was going to pass this year, and he explained why. Now, I don't know, were either of you at that event, or no, neither of you?
No,
okay.
neither were.
I was going to ask, I mean, that's what I've heard. I wasn't there, but I wonder.
We know people that were there also, but we weren't physically in the room.
What did they, do you want to relate what they told you? And what was the thrust? Is that a correct characterization of the meeting, that the speaker came out in advance of a vote and said it's going to pass and this is why?
Well, he is getting a lot of pressure, obviously, he's getting a lot of pressure from the congressional senators and representatives from above us, and he's getting a lot of pressure from the governor, and he's getting a lot of pressure from the progressives. So that's why there's so much of a push to move this bill. As far as the meeting went, I know, talking to some of the business owners that were there, they actually felt that it was a good meeting with him, that they appreciated him meeting with them and being very candid about it. And they basically are saying that those, the Moms Demand Action's up there screaming every day and causing a lot of pressure, and that people are starting to cave to that pressure. The
bill, as I read it this morning, allows owners of these present owners of these military-style firearms, they would be allowed to keep them under a so-called grandfather position, provided that they're registered with the police. What's wrong with that?
Well, so this is what my feeling about this, and I'll let Glenn tell you what he feels about it. But in my opinion, grandfathering is just a future ban, because you can't, in the grandfather clause, you cannot pass down any heirloom firearms or any firearms to family members. They're not going to be allowed to purchase them because they'll be prohibited. Okay, so now let's look at the other side of this. You want me to take property that I already own. You want me to get a permission slip registry so that I can still own my property, and then in permitted uses, you're going to tell me how I can use my already legally owned property. So that's like saying, okay, register your car, but you can't drive it on state roads, okay? That's how I feel, if you want to simplify it.
Well, so, I mean, without even addressing the fact, my personal opinion on registration, I mean, I think it's probably obvious that I share the same opinion as Brenda did, but from a pragmatic sense, like, the majority of people in this state that own these types of firearms that are semi-automatic, whether they're handguns, shotguns, and rifles, they make up most firearms in this state. The large majority of people that own these things will never know that this has been outlawed. Just the gun owners that are engaged in the debate right now are shocked that the firearms that they own are in this bill. And most of the people that own these things, they'll be oblivious. They won't register them, with the potential of going to prison for not registering it, similar to what we saw in the magazine ban. So the NSSF put out, we had north of 2 million magazines in this state that were considered high capacity. When the Police Chiefs Association was asked during the hearings in last session about whether or not folks turn those in, you know, the president of the Police Chiefs Association bragged that they had taken in 600 magazines, 600 out of 2 million. So sure, there'll be non-compliance, and I'm sure that legislators wouldn't have any sympathy for the folks that do that. But that's a very small percentage of the people in this state that would do that. There are lots of folks, the majority of folks, that have simply unaware of the fact that this thing is passed, and so they've got this item which they would have never thought would be considered an assault weapon, because it doesn't look like, doesn't function like, it's not an assault weapon, right? It could be a semi-automatic shotgun they shoot skeet with on a Sunday, and now that's deemed to be an assault weapon because it can hold more than 6 rounds, and they don't register it. You know, so this is it's the registration component in and of itself is a sort of catch-all for people that just aren't aware of the law. I get ignorance is no excuse, but that's something an attorney tells you or a legislator tells you. We've got enough laws in Rhode Island that I don't think most people are aware of what all of them are, and we don't sit there on the computer and refresh our screen every 15 minutes to find out what laws the General Assembly has enacted that affect firearms that you've owned for 30, 40, 50 years.
The states that already have an assault weapon ban, have they allowed the grandfather provision for the firearms?
Some states. So they've, you know, like for New York as an example, so after Newtown, they enacted a pretty heavy-duty assault weapons ban there, and compliance was somewhere in the 3% range.
That was
Yeah.
what I was leading to. They're saying you have to
Right.
do this, but
Yeah.
And most of that is ignorance of the law, right? It's not.
But it's not an excuse.
Right. It's not. Well, according to the folks that would enforce the law, sure. But I think a lot of it is just being unaware of the fact that the National Assault Weapons Ban in 1994 had a grandfathering clause, and there was no registration component of that. And I think a lot of folks in the gun community operate under that's how this is, and in many states that have these types of bans, so they assume it's very similar to what the national ban was, where you could still possess it. It was just no further manufacturing and sales of them, so you could transfer them between people, you could possess them, you didn't have to register them, similar to magazines. That's long since gone now. We've got states like Rhode Island that are passing bans, trying to pass a ban that has a single feature that would quantify it as an assault weapon, which is why it includes so many firearms. Right. And again, most gun owners will have no idea that the firearm they own is in this bill.
The characteristic, and I actually have a copy of the bill here that as we're speaking. Now, the characteristics that they claim define a military-style weapon. I mean, there's some things on here that are ridiculous. A grenade launcher, well, nobody can have grenades in the state anyway. A bayonet lug, well, not many people are going to use a bayonet in a mass shooting environment. Pistol grips, they say it makes it more controllable, but you look at these characteristics, and I think, if memory serves, we had a national assault weapons ban from 1994 to 2004. when it was up for renewal, it was a sunset provision in there. And I believe there were a couple of studies done that indicated that they could find no correlation between such a ban and a reduction in violent crime. So it was allowed to sunset, at which point many states, some of our neighbors began, automatically put in a ban to cover that. But I guess the original federal bill required that 2 of the characteristics had to be present. So what the manufacturers did was they just eliminated the ones that were like a bayonet lug and a grenade launcher, which were not available anyway, and they were able to qualify and still sell those firearms legally because it didn't have all the characteristics, or 2 of the characteristics. Well, I'm sorry, more than 2. Now this bill, as I understand it, calls for only 1 of those characteristics. So if someone has a rifle, if I understand what you're saying about the semi-automatic rifle, has a pistol grip, that would be automatically assumed to be,
Right.
Yeah. So that would,
Yeah.
so am I understanding that correct?
Yes.
So most of the firearms, any iteration of them would be an assault weapon simply because of the fact that they have a pistol grip and there is no other way to sort of fashion another grip onto that firearm. So it would be, again, a default ban on virtually all semi-automatic rifles and shotguns.
The provision that requires the registration of these firearms, there is a Rhode Island law on the books, 114741, that prohibits the state specifically from creating such a database or registry. And this bill, as I read it, obviates that part. They just skirt around it and say, okay, it doesn't apply to these types of weapons, that you are going to be required to register them. Is my understanding correctly?
Yeah, everything in this bill is wrong. They circumvent the Constitution throughout the whole bill.
I'm looking for the provision. You're saying something about not being able to pass this on. I thought this morning.
That's in there. That's part of the grandfather. That's if they have a specific clause in there. If the person dies, you have to turn the fire. You have to turn it into the police. You have to have it sold to a place that can legally own them. They can't be transferred to a family member.
Are you sure? I thought there was something that said an heir to the. No?
No.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood. If I can find it real quickly, I'll quote it. But so a person has 1 year to register all of their firearms so defined.
Right.
They're allowed to keep them. They have to pay a registry fee of $25. Is that per firearm or
Per person.
Per person.
So you're actually getting a license
To own your property.
a property that was legally owned until the law was passed.
Right.
Okay. What your options are, you can turn them into the police, or you can turn them into a federally licensed dealer.
Yep, and have them sold.
But that dealer cannot sell it to anybody else in the state.
In Rhode Island.
In
They
Rhode
have
Island,
to sell it on the
Out of
internet,
state.
or to another through another deal. Okay.
Right.
Now, it says that a law enforcement officer can carry it. What about retired police officers? Are they going to be allowed to have, if they own an assault weapon, they'd be able to register it, but it talks about law enforcement officers and National Guard and Army Reserve people who, while they're on duty.
Right. I know that that's been a point in contention with retired police officers, and a lot of veterans don't like this bill either because their firearms are all wrapped up into it as far as the military heirlooms.
I wish I could put my finger on it. I thought there was a provision that somebody could transfer it to an heir, and they had 90 days to re-register or something, but perhaps
No, because they're prohibited from owning it.
Oh.
So now that it's prohibited from sale or transfer or manufacturer, they can't be transferred.
Okay. It looks to me like, as you describe this, there's a lot of areas that, if this bill becomes law, that it can be challenged. And what you said earlier is that those people who are supporting this measure acknowledge that this might be, this is just kind of beyond my comprehension. They are able to argue that they want to tie up the opposition to this bill for years in court?
Right. I mean, so this is exactly what happened in New York State. So after the Bruin decision, that made law of the land that you have to have a pathway for someone to obtain a license to carry a firearm in public concealed. And so New York, being anti-gun in the more urban areas, the governor specifically, pushed through a whole cornucopia of anti-gun legislation associated, tethered to carrying concealed in public by making every single place what they refer to as a sensitive place in that decision. So, in effect, folks couldn't carry firearms anywhere because every place was a sensitive place, right? So, same tactic. They passed legislation, knowing that it would take years. In this case, it's been 2 years, and I think the court is ruling on it right now. Again, it's before the Supreme Court. The lower court had ruled on it, but the Supreme Court is, again, revisiting the same issue because they've found ways that they think can tie up this. So, in effect, New York has not changed in terms of their ability to issue gun permits or someone's ability to obtain a gun permit. They put all these things in place, as other states have, in response to that decision, because they're not happy with it. So the folks that are pushing these bills, again, if they truly believe that this is a solution, I think the majority of people that are supporting this, again, it's purely political. But the folks that actually do believe in gun control, if they ignore the data from their own attorney general and they want to push this forward, they're perfectly content with us having to litigate this because they know it's costly and it'll take a very long time.
I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, did the AFL-CIO labor union conduct a poll in Rhode Island to see how many people support this? Are you familiar with?
Yeah.
And?
Well, so polls they word the question, do you support a ban on assault weapons? And 64% of the people replied they support this. Now, the natural question I have is how was that question asked? Was it simply just saying assault weapon? Because folks don't know what an assault weapon is. They don't understand that it could be a handgun if it exceeds a certain weight, if it has an optic on it that's made to basically
over
make
50 ounces.
Yeah, over 50 ounces. That's again making it more controllable and making it, I guess, more accurate if you're using a defensive situation or if you're hunting, not in Rhode Island. But they've taken these firearms and they've defined these as assault weapons and. There's no forethought as far as what's going to happen to the people that own these types of things.
I don't believe that the polls are accurate or a good representation of the state of Rhode Island. So you have Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence right on their website says that they are 76%. They polled 600 people. Now you have this new poll with 400 people. That's not a good representation of Rhode Island, especially when you have 70,000 licenses issued from DEM for hunting in the state. It's not a good representation when in 2 weeks, when we did our petition in 2021, in 2 weeks we got 11,480 signatures. Even David Cicilline put a poll out of 4,500 people. 76% of people were against an assault weapons ban, and he took it down because the number went right just. They did it right on, was it CNN or MSNBC? Yeah. He put a poll out, 4.5 thousand people.
Was it in Congress or in his new job?
When he was in Congress.
Okay.
Right. But a more appropriate question would have been something like, do you support a ban on commonly owned semi-automatic firearms, right? It would be interesting if they actually polled their own members, because a lot of AFL-CIO members own firearms. Yeah. Folks that I work with that are members own firearms. Now, you think that the union, and again, I think the folks that run the lobby for the State House for the AFL-CIO, based on the things that they've supported over the years, they seem to be more interested in these issues that have absolutely nothing to do with labor, supporting the magazine ban. So these are things you think they'd be a little more concerned with maybe recuperating some of the losses they took during pension reform. I think their members would like to know why they're advocating for things like gun control.
Right.
So, I guess my question would be, I'm waiting to see how much time we have left. We have about 15 minutes, believe it or not. So I want to ask you about, you may have seen this, a supporter of gun rights is Representative Arthur Cavesi, a Democrat representing North Providence. He responded to an email or a letter from one of his constituents, and he said that the assault weapon ban is going to pass, largely because, and I quote, because the so-called leaders of the pro-Second Amendment in this state have become seemingly ineffective. Therefore, he concludes, and again I quote, "The Second Amendment movement will get what it deserves." You say what in response?
Well, I can say that we work very hard in this state to try and get the word out. And when that letter came out and, got put all over the internet, a lot of people, we obviously took a lot of flack for that. So I like to self-reflect. And one of the things that I, have gone over with the numbers is that we are very effective at notifying all of the gun clubs, notifying all of the leagues and associations. We're good at that. We don't have a lot of input back from our members. What demographic we are missing, though, is we're missing the average everyday homeowner that just has a firearm in their house for personal safety. How do we reach that demographic? So what we've done is we've kind of regrouped a little bit, and we have been advertising, and we've been putting, public service announcements out to the regular people and talking to the gun stores and saying, you have to help us get to these one or two they have one or two firearms in the house, and it's for public safety, because that's where the biggest number is. I mean, yeah, there's 40 gun clubs in the state, but we have members that we can count on continuously to be up at the State House for rallies and to be, to do the emails and phone calls, but we're not hitting the numbers they want us to hit. And also, I would just want to point out that we're not the ones that let the progressives in their party. We're not the ones who did that. They're the ones who let the progressives in their party and now pushing all of them left. That is not something that we had any control of, although we do try and get candidates every single year to run for office.
Right, and I think, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So, when this happened, immediately after Newtown, that was when there was a huge push in the state for change with respect to gun laws. And we saw lots of things that were not really connected to the types of issues we have here in this state. But you saw on both sides grassroots efforts on our side and grassroots on the other side. But when the other side went 2 or 3 years without any success getting any bills through, those folks evaporated. And they were replaced with a lot of these corporate types, like a lot of these professional lobbyists, consultants that came in and sort of orchestrated, like they do on a lot of the very left-leaning issues, and I'm sure red states do the same thing with some of their policies, but we were up against folks that have deep pockets. And it's very few people on that side. When you would go to the State House, you'd have 5,000, 6,000 gun owners, and you've had maybe a half dozen of the folks that are our opposition. And our biggest mistake was continuing to fight that as grassroots, thinking that, if you're a grassroots organization, that sounds like it's a great, you're on the right side of right. And we got outclassed by folks that had deeper pockets and had more resources than we do. And so we've slowly tried to implement some of those things, and that's about to get accelerated pretty heavily. Mm-hmm. But it's unfortunate that that's the way things went, and I think that a lot of the folks involved with the Second Amendment organizations, will take the heat for not sort of moving this into the 21st century. A lot of the technologies that the other side was using.
And a lot of it was money. Right. We don't have the money that they have to work with. People need to realize that our groups, our members, even the NRA, you pay to be a member. You pay to be a member of a gun club. We're all just blue-collar people, most of us. There are doctors and lawyers and, white-collar involved too, but we're on a very slim budget. They're getting outside donations. They don't have any skin in the game. They're not putting up their money. Our members are. So, and we just don't have as much money as they have. We don't have millionaires and billionaires that are funding our side where they do, and it's, that's very, it's not balanced at all.
Do either of your organizations have any full-time people, paid staff people?
We're all volunteers.
It's all volunteers.
So is that true of other pro-Second Amendment groups? Do any of them have?
No, there's no full-time.
On the other side of the coin now, is the gun control advocacy groups, do they have full-time paid?
Yes.
They do?
Yeah, several.
Yeah.
Several.
And that money you say is probably coming from out-of-state sources?
Yes, and they send, every town spends $100,000 a year for just one lobbyist here. And then the average, I think the average hourly rate per lobbyist, and I think they have 7, is $76 an hour.
Wait, they have 7 lobbyists?
Yeah, I think it's 7.
And all of the people that we get to go there are all volunteers.
Yeah.
So there's
Right.
no.
Yeah, I have the actual numbers actually here with me. But,
So, okay.
but they're,
go ahead.
it's
While you're
crazy.
looking, I just wanted to point out what Representative Corvasi said is that every day there are people with red shirts. By that, I guess he means the people who are in favor of this type of legislation. Every day they're at the State House and mingling with people, and he doesn't see many people with yellow shirts.
Right, yeah.
Right, but I mean, the folks that show up at the State House, I mean, this isn't like a school lunch program where we go one way or the other, whether it's free lunch or reduced lunch. This is someone's fundamental right to bear arms, right? Whether you think it from the Second Amendment or our own Article 1, Section 22. So regardless of who shows up at the State House, it shouldn't make a difference, right? If we applied those same standards, if we got folks to show up at the State House and advocate for restrictions on reproductive rights and we outnumber the other side, there's no way they would accept that, right? So this idea that our civil entitlements are somehow tethered or dictated by which group turns out more folks at the State House. I mean, normally it's us, but when it's the regular Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at the State House, they've got paid professionals that go and lobby. It still shouldn't matter. Right? But the fact that these people are going to support something that is not constitutional, and they're concerned more about the political implications of passing this bill or not passing it, they're swayed by that, and that's unconscionable.
And we do outnumber them, and we know that for a fact because even in the House side, when we email, it goes to the clerk, and then the clerk can tally how many emails pro and against, and we always outnumber them, by hundreds. We outnumber them at rallies by hundreds. But because they're there every day getting paid, it makes it very difficult for us to get people up there every single day to volunteer. We're all working.
Well, especially seem to be if there's a legislator who's, let's say, undecided, if a lobbyist gets in their face and then starts talking about one side of the issue, that would seem to me that would have kind of influenced them.
I'm sorry. Really, it's not about the issue, though. A lot of those folks that go and lobby, it's a threat. It's a threat. If you don't support our bill, more than likely, if you're a Democrat, you're going to get primaried by someone that's more progressive. And Jason and I, when we testified at the last batch of hearings, he made the comment that whether this is constitutional or not, or whatever the outcome of this assault weapons ban is, that when the magazine ban passed, that all of them were threatened that they would get voted out of office and they were all reelected. What he fails to realize is that all of the Democrats that voted with us on the magazine ban, that voted against it, won by bigger margins. They were reelected by the biggest margins they've ever been reelected by, and all of the Republicans that voted against it were reelected. So I think for our side, we're motivated to go out and vote against folks that vote against us. I think the other side, if you're someone that's predisposed to vote very far left, you're going to vote for that person anyway, right? So it's not going to make much of a difference, and it hasn't. Not one person in the Democratic Party that was sided with us on those bills was voted out of office.
They didn't lose their seat either. Right. And the other interesting fact is, right now we have a campaign, Don't Wait, Disaffiliate, because we want to be able to we're educating our side to be able to vote in the primaries. So we want everybody to disaffiliate so they can choose the primaries, because we know in the Democratic primaries we have the chance to get some of these progressives out of office, okay?
Assuming that there's another candidate in the primary that is less progressive.
Right.
True.
Yeah.
But the thing is that we didn't realize was going to happen. We thought that there would be a lot of Republicans disaffiliating, but there's actually more Democrats disaffiliating from their own party, which was kind of like surprising to us, but almost 2 to 1. So, that shows you.
There's a lot more Democrats registered.
There is, but it shows you that they're listening to us too.
Okay.
I feel like that's a pulse of where their party's heading, and that there's also a lot of, there's a lot of people that are turning against the progressive left leaning because they're starting to side more with us.
You used the term "every town" a little while ago.
Yep.
Got to understand a lot of our audience with that.
Okay.
So want to tell us about when you said every town is contributing money? Every
town is owned by Bloomberg, and every town is Mom Demand Action. They're the ones. That's Mom's Demand Action. That's their. They call it an education PAC. But their company as a whole is every town. And it started out as Mayors Against Gun Violence by Bloomberg,
Right.
and now it's changed to Everytown, and now it's a multi-million-dollar company, and they pay even some of our own legislators now, when they were lobbyists for Everytown, Venable paid them, so they were, so you can trace all the money back to Venable. But every town pays $110,000 annually for a whole firm, and then they pay $79.38 an hour, $118.75 an hour, $62.50 an hour, $75 an hour. State Craft Strategies, they get paid, let's see, $2,100 a month. Rhode Island Coalition Against Gun Violence, $6,250 a month. And we pay.
So the Rhode Island Coalition is different. It's not affiliated with Everytown. That's a separate organization.
Right.
And they're paying $6,200 a month for a lobbyist? Is that
Yep,
what you,
that's what it says.
We,
That's right from the state website. Now, we have National Shooting Sports Foundation, to be fair, because we want to be transparent. We have one that's paid $50 an hour. National Shooting Sports Foundation pays $5,000, and then I'm listed but I'm a volunteer. And National Shooting Sports Foundation, they represent the gun stores because it's of the small business aspect and the economic impact.
well, you referred also, we were almost out of time, but I just wanted to go back quickly to this idea of some, this is not going to be settled until the United States Supreme Court comes down with a ruling one way or the other. And of course, if it goes the way you don't want, then it becomes kind of a defeat. But if you win, that would automatically say that this law is unconstitutional if that ruling comes down on a broad basis. They don't narrow it just to Maryland, I think you said.
right, yeah. So I mean, you would think that most of again, if it's not the identical bill, but actually ours is worse. So if theirs goes down, very similar, features based on features and registration. If their bill goes down, which based on what they ruled in Bruin and what they ruled in Heller and Caetano, these three cases that have really set the stage for. And even if you read Bruin and the dicta in Bruin, it's obvious that they meant for modern sporting rifles like the AR-15 to be, it's constant, it'd be an infringement on your constitutional right if they did ban them. So we know how this ends, and we know if they do overturn it, that ours, I think, would go to, it would be much easier to get to that, overturning it if it's actually worse than the one that gets overturned.
Okay. Well, we certainly want to thank both of you for coming back on State of the State and presenting a fairly cogent argument for your position, and I hope our audience has enjoyed this. We did have Representative Knight on previously to express his concerns, and we're going to try to get some other representatives of the gun control advocacy groups to come on. It's been very difficult over several years to do that. We want to thank everybody for watching State of the State, and we hope we'll watch future editions. Thank you very much.